Hey everyone, my name is Aaron from Aaron Reviews Media, and from blockbuster action to boss fights, I'm covering it all. So grab your popcorn in one hand and your controller in the other, and let's dive into The Mandalorian and Grogu. So first I want to apologize for the lighting. I am currently visiting my parents' house for Memorial Day weekend, so this is what I have. You'll notice a different background, but we're just going to get on with the review. So once again, I apologize for the really bright light behind me. I've done my best to adjust the lighting, but again, this is what I have access to. This movie is the first Star Wars movie in 7 years, so naturally I was really excited for it. I also enjoyed the Mandalorian TV show generally, especially seasons 1 and 2. While season 3 had its flaws, I still got some enjoyment out of the show. So how does the movie hold up? Let's find out. This movie feels like 4 episodes of TV stitched together in a movie, which is pretty much what I expected going in. So the movie has 4 separate plots, some of which are better than others, but they are very disjointly connected, and you can see where the episode cuts would have been had this been a TV show. The first plot involves the Mandalorian and Grogu trying to hunt down a remaining Imperial warlord, but the only people who can give him the whereabouts of this warlord is the dangerous Hutt family. The Hutts want their nephew Rada to return to them, so he goes to hunt down Rada. The second episode is the capture of this Imperial warlord that he was looking for, and I really enjoyed this first half of the movie that covers these first 2 episodes per se. There are a lot of really entertaining moments, and most of the movie was pretty cohesive. The movie actually fakes you out that it's going to end after the end of this second episode type plot, only to realize that the movie still has an hour left. If the movie had ended here, I probably would have been more positive on the movie, but I would have been confused, that's it? That's all we're getting? Zeb is also a significant character in the first half of the movie, and he's really fun. He doesn't have to have a whole lot of depth to him because we already developed him in 4 seasons of Star Wars Rebels. My problems with the first half of the movie's plot is that Grogu is pretty much useless. He does almost nothing in the first half of the film. They rectify this later, but we'll get to my issues with that also in the later sections of this review. Also, the lack of the Empire in this movie is something that I took issue with. The core of the Mandalorian mythos is dealing with the Palpatine cloning and how the Empire is slowly rebuilding itself. In short, this movie has a massive Moff Gideon-sized hole, and they don't fill it very well with the 2 new villains they introduce. The opening scene of this movie also contains laughably bad acting and dialogue, which really can't be ignored, but it doesn't fit smoothly into one of the parts of the review, so I figured I'd mention it here. I really forgot about this scene by the end of the movie though, because there are a lot worse issues with this film, and the dialogue and acting issues disappear after the opening scene. The opening scene really feels like something that was shot in a reshoot because it's so different from the rest of the film. So it's interesting that the opening scene is has all these bad and corny acting and dialogue, where I didn't see that throughout the rest of the film really. The second half of this movie, or episodes 3 and 4 of what would have been Mando season 4, are significantly worse. The plot of what would be episode 3 involves Embo tracking down the Mandalorian for the Hutt family, which I won't get into too much detail to avoid spoilers, but it's fine. The action in the Mando scenes are fine, but in this little episode of the movie, they separate Grogu and Mando, and Grogu simply does not work as his own character, which I'll elaborate on the character section of the review. Plot-wise, though, it's just a very odd choice to separate Mando and Grogu when the movie revolves around both of them being together. Babu Frick and his friends are here also. They're fine, I guess. This part of the movie is made specifically to cater to 5-year-olds, and the 4th episode is no better. The 4th episode, or essentially the whole 3rd act of this movie, is Grogu on Nal Hutta by himself. The movie rectifies the issue where Grogu does nothing in the first half of the film, but it's an overcorrection. Grogu doesn't work without the Mandalorian to counterbalance him with a more serious character. The Mandalorian is removed from 25 minutes in this movie just to focus on Grogu, and this absolutely does not work. I was incredibly bored by this part of the movie because it felt like it was made for 5-year-olds, and I was wondering to myself the whole time, when does this end? This portion of the movie is meant to remind you of Yoda on Dagobah, but it doesn't work, mainly because Grogu doesn't talk. It is incredibly boring for the adult audience that would know what Dagobah is, and the 5-year-olds who would enjoy this part of the movie have no idea what Dagobah is. It is also not believable that Grogu would survive by himself on this incredibly hostile planet as a baby. They even point out that he's the bottom of the food chain. They have a character come up to him and say, "Oh, you're the bottom of the food chain on this planet." For Yoda on Dagobah, it's believable that he would survive because he has over 900 years of Jedi training experience, but there is no reason Grogu should survive with how they wrote this movie. The last thing about this half of the movie is that there's no Empire or Zeb in it, and the absence of both is felt. I'm not going to get into the final part of the movie's plot to avoid spoilers, but it did bounce back a little bit at the end. I found this last 20 minutes or so of this movie a lot more entertaining than the whole hour leading up to it. Overall, the first half and second half of this movie felt like completely different movies. They make a lot of baffling choices with the plot in the second half. I'd give the first half of this movie a 3.5 stars on plot and the second half a 1 star on plot, so it averages out to barely 2.5 stars on the overall plot of the film. The characters in this film are a mixed bag. My main problem is that the movie has a massive villain problem. It's pretty tough to top Moff Gideon, and they come nowhere close. They don't even really try. It's likely because the villains in this film work as one-off or 2-episode villains, but not as overarching movie villains. The initial plan for this movie was to cap off the Mandoverse and feature Ahsoka, Bo-Katan, and Thrawn definitely would have fixed this movie's villain problem. Of course, the problem with Thrawn is that it removes the standalone nature of this movie, but even with a standalone movie, you can still have a good villain, which this movie doesn't really have. The first Imperial Warlord has the making of a good villain, but he is stopped too early. Also, he doesn't have the reach or resources that you'd expect someone of his standing to have. I would have liked to have a few more resources at his disposal. The Hutt twins are just kind of cartoonishly evil and underdeveloped. I also don't like the fact that they speak English. Jabba was intimidating because he didn't speak English and he had this really imposing voice. I'm aware that the Hutts speak English in the Clone Wars too. I also wasn't a fan of that. There's just a vibe to the twins that makes them too distant from Jabba, I think, but I can't really pinpoint the exact thing that I was feeling when I was watching the movie of these guys are ridiculous. Like, they're nothing compared to Jabba. There's also the issue of Boba Fett, who's currently taking over from Jabba, and while he isn't in this film, the plot revolves around Rada being the only heir to Jabba and the twins want his throne. But Boba is kind of forgotten. How does he play into this? Granted, the writers might have forgotten about the book of Boba Fett, as I also want to forget about that horrendous show. The main characters of Mando and Grogu are fine. They don't have any character arcs or growth. The writers try to give Grogu some time to shine on his own, which I mentioned in the plot section of this review, but Grogu simply does not work by himself. There's only so much cuteness and Jedi training you can do with Grogu before it becomes stale. Because the character can't talk, he isn't that compelling or enjoyable to watch. They really need to fast track his development, in my opinion, so that he can talk or give him a lightsaber. Honestly, I'll buy into his character if he just starts flipping around and fighting with lightsabers. I think that would be so cool because lightsabers are cool. But there's also the fact that he's a tiny puppet where his limbs can't move individually, which makes the production cheaper for sure, but it makes it difficult to do any fun choreography with him or fights. At this point, a transition to a CGI character could help, but it would be difficult to maintain the look of Grogu. The main arc they try to do is develop Grogu so now he's capable of protecting the father figure that has had to protect him for 3 seasons of The Mandalorian. It kind of works, but the way that they execute this doesn't have the same payoff because of what Grogu is protecting Mando from. Grogu doesn't save Mando from a massive monster or imperial threat, but rather from something uneventful, in terms of action at least. The actual consequences of the thing that Grogu saves Mando from are massive in scale, but the actual scene of Grogu saving Mando is not something crazy, or he doesn't use the Force to lift up a boulder off of Mando, or use the Force to attack a creature that's attacking Mando. He saves him from something that is kind of the aftermath of the fight that Mando is in, and without spoiling too much, I can't really say any more, so let's move on to the next part of the characters in this movie. The side characters are the best part of this movie, so let's go through them one by one. Rada the Hutt is the first side character, and he has the most defined arc in this film. It's pretty much the same exact thing as the Hulk in Thor Ragnarok, from him not trying to become a monster down to the gladiatorial combat. And I enjoyed it in Thor Ragnarok, so I enjoyed it in this movie also. It's pretty well thought out. Jeremy Allen White's voice for Rada is a little unsettling at first, but I thought that it fit the more you got into the film. For this character, it makes sense that he speaks English because he spent most of his life outside of Nal Hutta, so he wouldn't have only developed the Hutt language. My issue with his character is that he states his character arc directly, constantly in the film. "I'm not trying to be my father," or something along those lines, is said by him at least 5 times. You can show that through his actions, which the movie also eventually does, but he just keeps stating, like, this is the arc that I'm trying to go through. I'm not trying to be my father. And it gets really repetitive. You don't have to keep saying that to show that's what you're trying to do with this character. He's also kind of a character that is conveniently in the right place and knows the right things to move the plot along. Some of the writing around the convenience of his character probably could have been done better. I really enjoyed Rada the Hutt overall, though. Originally, I thought he was a little confusing of a character to be brought back in this film specifically. Like, really? We are bringing back this guy from the very poorly received 2008 Clone Wars movie, but he definitely makes up for it with how fun and great he is in this film. Zeb is awesome in this movie, as I mentioned earlier. He has great action scenes and his classic Rebels humor. He's missing from the second half of the movie, except the final fight, and you really feel his absence, especially in the Grogu-only moments. Like, I really wish we could cut to Zeb right now. Sometimes I found myself thinking that, like, during the Grogu-only scenes. And there's not much else I can say about this character other than he was maybe a little underutilized, but he's a lot of fun, as always, and it's great to see him in live action. Embo is also awesome in this movie. He just aura farms the entire movie. He's really competent at his job, which I appreciated because in the Clone Wars he was shown as the second best bounty hunter of all time behind Cad Bane. He is one of my favorite characters in the Clone Wars, and they really did him justice in bringing him to live action. When he finally did his signature move of throwing the hat as a frisbee and using it as like a shield and as an offensive weapon, it was really cool, and it always has been really cool, but it looks even better in live action. He also has this air of mysteriousness to him, which I think is a cool vibe, even for us Clone Wars fans who know who Embo is. But if you're new to this character from this movie, he really just brings in that mystery. You're like, who is this guy that's hunting down Mando? Overall, while the side characters in this film are pretty fun, the main characters lack depth or character development, and the movie has a serious villain problem. I would lean slightly negative on the characters, which lands at a 2 out of 5 stars overall. The pacing of this film is all over the place. The first half of the movie is over way too quickly, leaving me to say, that's it. Like, that's all we're gonna get. Okay, I guess we're done now. And that is a fake out ending that the movie pulls, but after the fake out ending, it really gets a lot worse. Because of the pacing of the first half of the movie, the second half of the movie drags a lot, in addition to a lot of writing choices that were very bizarre that make it feel like the second hour of this movie is actually 3 hours. I went to the theater with my family to see this movie, and the very first thing they said when they got out of the theater was, it was fine, but the movie could have been shorter. This is why pacing is so integral to a movie, because you really don't want the audience feeling like it was too long, and I personally felt that this movie was too long for sure. Unfortunately, the part of the movie that is too quick is the good part, and the part that drags on forever is the boring part, which is usually how it goes. I wouldn't be calling it a boring part if it didn't feel like it dragged on forever. Every time Grogu is on the screen by himself or with the little Babu Fricks, the movie grinds to a halt. I'm constantly wondering when will this be over, and I got incredibly bored. The second half of the movie is paced so bizarrely, mostly due to the writing choice of including unnecessary Grogu content to appeal to 5-year-olds and to sell merchandise. It doesn't help that the first half of the film is paced too quickly, because it means that you get to the boring part of the movie faster. Generally, a film should have a fast-paced first act, then slow down a bit for the second act without getting boring, and then even faster and exciting third act. This film has the fastest first act, a moderately fast second act, and then the third act slows down vastly. Finally, the film picks up right up at the end in Act 3.5, 4. Movies don't usually have more than 3 acts, but it's hard to pick where the act lines are exactly in this rigid structure because of the odd episodic structure of the film where it feels like a TV show stitched together. I thought the pacing in this film was really bad for the most part, but there were parts I thought were paced appropriately, like the Gladiator planet, which saved it from a 0 or 0.5 stars, so I'm going to have to give it on 1 star on pacing. The visuals in this movie were pretty good overall. There were a couple of clunky fight scenes and choreography, especially on the snow planet on the start of the film, but overall things did not look that bad. Remember when I said the snow planet felt like an entirely different movie? this is what I'm referring to partially. Like, the visuals look way different on it too, and it's definitely my least favorite part of the entire film. Let's talk about the monsters. Star Wars is finally bringing back aliens to Star Wars, and all of the weird and deadly monsters look great in this film. I really like the look of the serpent in the film, and there are these deadly lizard people that attack Mando a few times, which also look pretty good. Jon Favreau is definitely focused on bringing in the monster-like aliens to Star Wars because this film is loaded with them. There are also a bunch of monsters that fight in the gladiatorial arena, and they all look pretty good. They are different types of aliens, so the models for aliens aren't reused a whole lot, which also adds to the individuality of the film. The film is also the first live-action Star Wars to feature a Hutt for an extended period of time, and all the Hutts in this film look good. Rada the Hutt having abs was a bit of an odd choice, I thought, but I don't think that they look bad per se, just that it's interesting to see these fat slug creatures be fit. Would they even develop human-like abs? It was very interesting. Also, as I mentioned earlier, the fight scenes with Embo are great. I love the choreography of each one, especially the last fight scene he has. The other fight scenes are also my favorite parts of the film. Every single one in the entire movie is great and memorable. Finally, let's talk about the environments Mando visits. I'm going to walk you through them one by one and my thoughts on them. The first planet is a snow planet similar to Hoth, and it looks fine, but it's definitely the worst looking part of the film. The good news is that we're only on this planet for the first 5 to 10-ish minutes of the film. The second planet is a generic city planet similar to Coruscant, which is fine. I wish the urban development of the planet was explored more. We only visit like 2 locations on this planet, one of which is an underground fight rink, which looks pretty good. Then Mando and Grogu and Rada visit an island that's entirely a beach, which is pretty easy to get right in terms of visuals, so I don't have a lot of comments there. The interior of the palace they raid looks appropriately regal, and the indoor hallways aren't too crammed that the action is hard to follow. There's the Ash Planet from the Mando TV show, which is just reused shots, and it looks exactly the same. One thing I will say when they visit this is you definitely feel the absence of Carl Weathers, and he obviously passed away, so he couldn't be in this film. But there are a lot of roles that other characters take in this film that Grief Karga, who is Carl Weathers' character, probably could have done in this movie, and it would have made it just slightly better. Finally, there's Nal Hutta, which is what I want to focus on. They faithfully recreated the planet from the Clone Wars into live action, and it looks really, really good. The swamp is portrayed as accurately and dangerous and infested with creatures. And the tree where the Hutts live is also super well designed and thought out. It looks exactly like the Clone Wars episodes, not a lot of variation, and they did a really great job at bringing this to live action. The last thing to mention with the visuals is there's no title crawl in this movie, just like Solo and Rogue One, but the exposition they provide at the start of the movie is not the regular blue text. It just looks like someone took 5 minutes in a video editor to write white text in basic font over the center of a black screen. Like, it does not look good. I would have liked to see the iconic Star Wars text in the opening crawl. Because of everything that I've mentioned, especially the fact that the exposition text just pulled me straight out of the movie, I'm going to give the movie a 3-star rating on visuals. Slightly positive, but nothing impressed me significantly except the Nal Hutta transition to live action. This film is super frustrating and hard to rate because I really enjoyed parts of this film, and there are other parts that made me want to leave the theater out of boredom. When the action is in high gear, there's a smile on my face, and this movie is 5 stars of entertainment for sure. But when the film cuts to Grogu and baby Babu Frick, it is so boring that I was really frustrated. Additionally, I didn't like the opening snow planet scene, as I've mentioned in other parts of my review. It had bad action scenes, bad writing, and bad acting. This is a small part of the film, but when you open with it, it makes you think, oh boy, I'm in for the long haul, which may have affected my perception of the rest of the film by immediately souring my mood. Ultimately, I did enjoy the film though, so I have to give it at least neutral, which is 2.5 stars, but I don't think it's a 4-star film by any means. I think I'll land around 3.5 stars on entertainment, which I think is fair, because someone who is not a critic and critically evaluating this movie would probably rate it a 7 out of 10. This movie is super frustrating and definitely a disappointment for the first Star Wars movie in 7 years. Star Wars films are supposed to be event films that everyone must see in the movie theater. This movie is not that. It feels like a perfectly serviceable streaming follow-up to The Mandalorian, but it isn't Star Wars movie level caliber. I came out of this movie thinking, that was okay. This movie averages to 2.5 stars out of 5, and I personally give this movie a 5 out of 10, and I would skip this in the theaters and catch it on Disney Plus when it comes out. As always, like, subscribe, and comment. Remember, keep consuming media so I can